There are certain phrases that have no business existing in the English language. Moist gusset is one. We need to talk is another. But the one that was currently making my eye twitch, printed in an offensively cheerful Times New Roman font, was non-standard house numerals. It was right there, on a crisp sheet of beige paper that felt far too important for the nonsense it contained. The letterhead read, Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association, Architectural Review Committee, which is a fancy way of saying, the committee of people with too much time on their hands. I reread the sentence, hoping I'd had a minor stroke and had simply misinterpreted it. Nope, still there. The recently installed metallic house numerals at 124 Chestnut Lane have been deemed non-standard and are not in keeping with the traditional aesthetic of the community. My numerals, my beautiful, sleek, brushed nickel sans serif numerals that I had spent a solid 45 minutes researching on a high-end design website. The numbers I had painstakingly leveled and installed myself just last Saturday, feeling an embarrassingly profound sense of homeowner pride. They were, in my humble opinion, the Steve McQueen of house numbers, cool, minimalist, and timeless. Apparently, the HOA preferred the Danny DeVito of house numbers, short, round, and stuck in the 70s. Attached to the violation notice was a grainy black and white photo of my house, with my gorgeous numbers circled in an aggressive red marker, like evidence from a crime scene. And below that, the kicker, a fine of $50 has been assessed to your account. Please rectify the violation within 14 calendar days to avoid further daily assessments. 14 days. To do what? Destandardize my house? Rip this beautiful piece of modern art off my wall and replace it with the curly brass monstrosities that adorned every other identical house on this street? I looked up from the letter, a slow burn starting in my chest. The street was quiet, a perfect suburban diorama. Lawns were mowed to a uniform height. Hedges were trimmed into unnervingly perfect rectangles. It was the kind of neighborhood you move to when you're tired of the city, when you want peace and quiet and a place to grill. I hadn't realized I was also signing up for a beige dictatorship. This wasn't just a letter. This was a declaration of war. A beige, passive-aggressive, $50 declaration of war. And if the Maple Creek Estates HOA wanted a war over numbers, I was about to give them something they couldn't even count. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over my girlfriend Sarah's contact. She was the voice of reason in our relationship, the person who stopped me from buying a life-sized velociraptor statue for the garden last year. She needed to be briefed. The resistance was about to be formed. "Hey," I said when she answered, my voice deceptively calm. "You will not believe what just landed in our mailbox. It seems our house numbers have offended the aesthetic sensibilities of the neighborhood Politburo." There was a weary sigh on the other end of the line. "Oh no, Alex. What did you do?" "Me? I did nothing," I protested, walking towards my front door to get another look at the offending articles. "I installed numbers that are, and I quote, non-standard. Apparently they prefer something from the 1990s clip art collection. The font I used was probably too legible." Alex: "I'm serious. It's from Carol Weatherby, the HOA president. Is she the one who stared at you for a full minute because you put the recycling bin out on a Tuesday night instead of Wednesday morning?" "The very same," I said, a grim smile on my face. "She's assessed a fine. We have 14 days to comply." I paused, looking at the numbers gleaming in the afternoon sun. They were a beacon of individuality in a sea of beige conformity. "I don't think I'm going to comply, Sarah." "What are you going to do?" she asked, a note of deep suspicion in her voice. I looked at the letter again, at the vague, undefined phrase, standard house numerals. A grin, wide and wicked, spread across my face. "Oh, I'm going to comply," I said. "I'm going to comply so hard they're going to have to rewrite the rule book." To understand the sheer, unadulterated pettiness I was up against, you need to understand Maple Creek Estates. We bought the house 6 months ago. The brochure promised serene community living and showed pictures of happy, ethnically diverse families laughing over sprinklers. It did not show Carol Weatherby measuring the height of someone's grass with a ruler, a scene I had personally witnessed 2 weeks prior. To formulate a proper battle plan, I needed intelligence. I needed to know my enemy. So I did what any suburban soldier would do. I went to talk to the guy next door. Dave was a mild-mannered accountant in his late 40s, a man whose entire existence seemed to be a quiet plea not to be noticed. He was out front, as he was most evenings, engaged in a deeply personal and intense relationship with his lawn. He was watering the concrete path, not the grass, the path. I felt this was a telling detail about life in the neighborhood. "Hey, Dave," I said, leaning on the invisible property line that I was sure Carol had measured to the millimeter. "Got a second?" He looked up from his hose, a flicker of panic in his eyes, like a field mouse spotting a hawk. "Alex, everything all right? Your trash cans are already in, right? It's past 6. "My cans are safely hidden in the garage, I promise," I said, holding up the beige envelope. "I just wanted to ask you about this. I've been initiated." Dave's eyes widened as he recognized the color of the envelope. He turned off his hose and shuffled closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "The numbers?" he hissed. "The numbers," I confirmed grimly. "I knew it," he said, shaking his head with the weary resignation of a man who had seen too much. "I told my wife, Brenda, I said, 'Brenda, those numbers are too sharp, too pointy. Carol likes curves. Soft, non-threatening curves. Welcome to the club, kid.' This was my opening. 'So this is normal? Fines for fonts?' Dave let out a short, bitter laugh. 'Normal? Alex, that's just the welcome basket. Let me tell you about Carol Weatherby.' He leaned against his perfectly pruned hedge. 2 years ago, we had the great mailbox alignment of Turadon 23. Carol got it in her head that the mailboxes weren't in a perfectly straight line when viewed from the end of the street. Sent out a notice. Everyone had to pay a guy $200 to come out and move their mailbox post 3 inches to the left. Mine was already compliant, but she fined me anyway for aesthetic non-uniformity during the transition period. "You're kidding me," I said, my jaw slack. "I wish. Remember the Hendersons? The people who used to live 2 doors down? Nice family. He was a dentist. She was a painter. They painted their front door burgundy." He said the word burgundy like it was a foul curse. "And let me guess, that wasn't an approved color?" "The approved color was Merlot," Dave said, his eyes distant with the memory of the horror. They looked identical to me, to any sane person. But Carol brought out the official HOA paint swatch book, held it up to their door at the monthly board meeting, shamed them in front of God and everyone. They got a $500 fine. They put the house on the market 6 months later. Carol told people they were transferred for work, but we all know. They were chased out by a paint chip. He wasn't done. He told me about the unapproved wind chime incident, where a gentle, melodic chime was deemed a noise pollutant, and the owner was forced to remove it. He recounted the saga of the basketball hoop that was left out overnight, resulting in a notice that referred to it as a semi-permanent recreational structure. Every story was more absurd than the last. Carol Weatherby wasn't just an HOA president. She was a suburban warlord ruling her tiny fiefdom with an iron fist wrapped in a beige glove. "So what do I do?" I asked. Do I appeal? Do I just pay the $50 and buy some curly numbers? Dave looked at me, a deep sadness in his eyes. That's what they want you to do, Alex. They grind you down. You fight at first, sure, you write emails. You go to a board meeting and try to argue. But then Carol just reads from the bylaws in a monotone for 20 minutes until you lose the will to live. Eventually, you just pay the fine. You buy the Merlot paint. You put your trash cans away at 8:59 a.m. You just comply. It's easier. I looked at Dave, at his perfectly manicured lawn, at his path that was now drying in the evening sun. I saw my future. A future of beige compliance, of surrendering my will to the whims of a woman who thought burgundy was a rebellious statement. No, not me. Not for $50. Not for my beautiful non-standard house numbers. I thanked Dave for the intel, my mind racing. His stories hadn't scared me. They'd radicalized me. He thought he was giving me a cautionary tale, but what he'd actually given me was a mission. You can't fight a system like this with logic and reason. You can't appeal to their better nature, because they don't have one. The only way to fight absurdity is with bigger, better, and more glorious absurdity. I went back inside and sat down at my computer. I opened the 300-page PDF file of the Maple Creek Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I poured a large glass of whiskey, and I started to read. For hours, I scrolled through endless pages of legalese about lawn care, satellite dish placement, and fence heights. My eyes glazed over. I was about to give up, to concede defeat, and just order some stupid curly numbers from Amazon. But then I found it. Section 8, Article 4, Subsection C, Property Address Identification. It was a short paragraph. It stated in no uncertain terms that every residence must clearly display standard house numerals visible from the public thoroughfare. And that was it. That was the entire rule. No mention of font, size, material, color, or method of illumination. It was a loophole. A beautiful, gaping, glorious loophole. The architects of this suburban prison had made a fatal error. They had relied on the shared, unspoken assumption of what standard meant. They never imagined someone like me. Someone who would hear the word standard and think, okay, what's the most non-standard way I can adhere to that standard? My frustration had been building all night. I was tired, angry, and a little drunk. I started clicking aimlessly around the internet, trying to distract myself. I landed on a sports news site, and my eyes fell on an ad in the sidebar. It was for a company that sold stadium equipment, and right there, in the middle of the ad, was a picture of a brand new, high-definition football scoreboard. A light bulb didn't just go on in my head. It was a full-blown nuclear detonation of an idea, a mushroom cloud of malicious, beautiful, idiotic genius. I turned my desk chair around slowly. Sarah was on the couch, peacefully watching some British baking show. "Honey," I said, my voice trembling with the sheer brilliance of my own mind. "I have an idea." Sarah muted the TV. "I know that tone of voice. That's your, I'm about to spend $1,000 on something we absolutely do not need tone." "This is different," I insisted, trying to contain my excitement. "This is something we absolutely do need. It's a necessity. It's for our safety and our compliance." "What is it, Alex?" she asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "The bylaws," I began, standing up and starting to pace like a lawyer about to deliver his closing argument. "They say we need standard house numbers, but they're vague. They don't specify the method of display. They just have to be numbers, and they have to be standard." "Okay," she said, drawing out the word. "And?" "So," I said, stopping and spreading my arms wide. "What if our numbers were digital, displayed on, say, a 6-foot by 10-foot full-color commercial-grade LED screen, the kind you see at a football game?" Sarah stared at me. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Her expression shifted from suspicion to confusion, then to a sort of horrified awe. "You want to put a jumbotron," she said slowly, "on the front of our house." "I want to put a digital numerical display board on the front of our house," I corrected her. "It's not a jumbotron. It's an advanced address identification system. It will display our numbers very clearly, thus complying with the rules. What could be more standard than the scoreboards used in every high school and college across this great nation? The cost, Alex, the neighbors, the sheer unholy light it would produce. Details, details. I waved my hand dismissively. Think of the principle of the thing, Sarah. This is for everyone who's ever been fined for having the wrong shade of front door. This is for the wind chimes. This is for the garbage cans. This is for Dave and his perfectly watered concrete path. We can't let them win. She put her head in her hands, but I could see her shoulders shaking. When she looked up, she was trying not to smile. You are completely insane. Is that a yes? She sighed, a long, theatrical sigh that meant I had won. Fine, but I am not helping you explain this to my mother, and you are naming it. Naming it? Yes. Any home renovation project this stupid deserves a name. I looked at the beige envelope still sitting on the counter. I thought of Carol Weatherby and her army of compliant, curly-numbered houses. Okay, I said, a grin spreading across my face. We'll call it Operation Annoy Thy Neighbor. The first step in any grand, ill-advised plan is realizing you can't do it alone. I am many things, a decent griller, an expert at untangling knotted cables, and now a suburban revolutionary. But I am not an electrician qualified to bolt a 2-ton LED screen to the side of a house. I needed a contractor. I needed an accomplice. This, it turned out, was the hardest part. My quest began with a hopeful Google search for large outdoor LED screen installation. This led me to a series of slick, corporate-looking websites. I made my first call. Vibrant Visuals, this is Tiffany, a chipper voice answered. Hi, Tiffany, I began, trying to sound as normal as possible. I'm looking to get a price quote for a digital display installation. Of course. Is this for a retail space, a sports venue, a corporate lobby? A house, I said. The silence on the other end was profound. A house? Tiffany finally stammered. Yes, a residential home. I'd like to install a display board, maybe 10 feet wide, to display my house number. Sir, she said, her voice now laced with the cautious tone one uses with a person who might be wearing a tinfoil hat. I think you have the wrong number. We do commercial signage. But it's not signage, I insisted. It's just numbers. Very, very large numbers. I'm going to have to let you go, sir. Click. The next call went similarly. I tried to be more direct. Hi, I want to buy a scoreboard and have it installed on my house. The guy on the other end, who sounded like his name was probably Chad, actually laughed. A scoreboard? Like for a game? Dude, are you building a stadium in your backyard? No, it's for my address. The Homeowners Association is being... Whoa, Chad cut me off. You said the magic words, man, HOA. We don't touch jobs in HOA neighborhoods. Our liability insurance isn't high enough to deal with that kind of crazy, sorry. Click. I made 3 more calls. One contractor told me that what I was proposing would violate 17 city codes before he even unloaded his truck. I had already checked. He was lying. Another simply said, "Are you joking?" and hung up. I was beginning to lose hope. My grand gesture of defiance was being thwarted by the utter sanity of the professional tradesman community. Dejected, I scrolled to the 4th page of Google search results, the digital wilderness where websites haven't been updated since 2003. And there I saw it, A simple, no-frills listing with a clip art picture of a wrench. Gus's gutsy installations. No job too weird. We bolt anything to anything. This was it. This had to be it. I dialed the number, and a gruff, gravelly voice that sounded like it had been aged in whiskey and cigarette smoke answered with a simple, "Yeah?" "Hello, is this Gus?" I asked. "Last time I checked," the voice grumbled. "What do you need, bolted?" I took a deep breath and let the whole story pour out. The beige envelope, the non-standard numbers, Carol Weatherby, the bylaws, the loophole, my glorious, insane idea for a scoreboard. I expected him to laugh or hang up. Instead, there was a long, thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. "An HOA," Gus said finally, his voice a low rumble. "Told you that your numbers weren't standard." "That's the gist of it, yeah," I said, bracing for rejection. "And you want to put a scoreboard on your house to show 'em?" "Technically, it's a digital numerical display board," I said, sticking to my official terminology. "But yes, that is the plan." There was another long pause, and then a sound I wasn't expecting. A low, rumbling chuckle that grew into a full-throated, hearty laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had seen the world's foolishness and had decided he was on the side of chaos. "Son," Gus said, his voice full of newfound cheer, "I'll be there in an hour. I've been waiting for a job like this my whole life." An hour later, a slightly rusty but powerful-looking Ford F-250 pulled into my driveway. The door opened and Gus emerged. He was exactly what you'd hope for. A burly man in his 60s with a magnificent gray mustache, forearms like knotted ropes, and a tool belt that looked like it had survived multiple wars. He walked right past me, his eyes fixed on the front of my house. "Yep," he said, stroking his mustache. "Right there. Above the garage door, below the eaves. Perfect. We'll have to reinforce the load-bearing studs, but that's no problem." He turned to me and stuck out a calloused hand. "Gus, good to meet a man of principle." We shook hands. It was like shaking a leather-wrapped brick. "Alex, you really think this is possible?" Gus clapped me on the shoulder, nearly sending me through the floorboards. "Son, for the right price, I could bolt a battleship to a skyscraper. A little scoreboard is child's play." He grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Especially when it's to stick it to an HOA. I hate those busybody committees more than I hate rust. And I really hate rust." We spent the next hour walking around the front of the house. He wasn't just a contractor. He was a co-conspirator, an artist of absurdity. He talked about power requirements, mounting brackets, and running conduit through the attic. I showed him my highlighted copy of the bylaws. He cackled with glee when he read the loophole. We were two mad scientists planning our beautiful monster. This wasn't just a job for Gus. This was a calling. The week that followed was a blur of covert operations. Gus would show up in his truck at odd hours, taking measurements and making notes. To any curious onlookers, it probably looked like I was getting an estimate for new gutters. In reality, we were designing the engine of suburban chaos. At night, I'd get emails from him with subject lines like, "Regarding the illumination device," and attachments of product catalogs from companies with names like Mega Bright Displays and Stadium Protronics. We pored over the options like generals planning an invasion. We discussed pixel pitch, viewing angles, and NIT brightness ratings. "This one here," Gus said one afternoon, pointing to a spec sheet on his clipboard. "The ProView 5000. It's got a 10,000 NIT rating. To give you some perspective, most highway billboards are around 7,000. This thing will be visible from space." "Is that too much?" I asked, a flicker of doubt entering my mind. "No such thing as too much," Gus grunted, making a note. "We want to make a statement, don't we? The statement is my house numbers are now the brightest object in this zip code. He was right. This was no time for half measures. The ProView 5000 it is, I declared. My activity, however discreet, had not gone unnoticed by the neighborhood watchtower. Another beige envelope appeared in my mailbox. This one wasn't a fine, it was a friendly reminder. Dear resident, it began, this letter serves as a friendly reminder that any and all external modifications to your property, including but not limited to painting, structural additions, and major landscaping, require the prior written submission of plans and subsequent approval from the Architectural Review Committee. We thank you for your cooperation in maintaining the beautiful and uniform character of our community. It was signed by Carol. It was a warning shot, a clear message. I see you, I'm watching you. I showed the letter to Gus. He read it, snorted, and handed it back. She's getting nervous, he said with satisfaction. She can smell a rebellion brewing. From his perch across the street, Gus pointed with his chin. She's watching us right now. That window. The one with the slightly parted curtains. I glanced over and saw a flicker of movement. It was like being observed by a very boring, very judgmental ghost. Let her watch, I said, my resolve hardening. She's about to get a front row seat to progress. How are we on the power draw? I don't want the neighborhood lights to dim every time I turn it on. I paused, stroking my chin. Actually, on second thought. Gus grinned. Don't you worry. I'm gonna run a dedicated 240-volt line straight from the main panel in your garage. This baby's gonna have its own private power supply. It's gonna shine brighter than her sense of self-importance. With our final plans in place, the moment of truth arrived. I sat at my computer, the web page for the ProView 5000 glowing on my screen. The price tag was substantial. It was more than I had spent on my last car. I hesitated, my cursor hovering over the Confirm Purchase button. Sarah walked into the room, a cup of tea in her hand. Thinking about bailing? She asked gently. The thought crossed my mind, I admitted. This is a truly idiotic amount of money to spend just to annoy a woman named Carol. Yes, she said, taking a sip of her tea. It is. But, she added, a small smile playing on her lips. Yesterday I got a notice in the mail that our garden gnome is an unapproved lawn ornament. It's been out there for 3 days. My eyes met hers. We didn't need to say another word. The garden gnome had sealed the deal. This was no longer just my war. It was a family matter. I clicked the button. A confirmation page popped up. Thank you for your order. Your item will be shipped via freight carrier. Estimated delivery, 3-5 business days. The clock was officially ticking. The beast was on its way. The day the scoreboard arrived was, without a doubt, the most significant event in the history of Maple Creek Estates since its founding. It eclipsed the great mailbox alignment and even the Burgundy Door incident. It began with a low, rumbling sound that grew steadily louder, a sound wholly unfamiliar to our serene suburban enclave. It was the sound of a 53-foot semi-truck attempting to navigate a cul-de-sac designed for nothing larger than a minivan. I was watching from the living room window, a mug of coffee in my trembling hands. The truck, emblazoned with the logo Heavy Load Logistics, performed what must have been a 27-point turn, its air brakes hissing with protest each time. Neighbors began to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. They stood on their perfect lawns, arms crossed, whispering to each other. This was high drama. The truck finally managed to back into my driveway, its rear end overhanging into my lawn and crushing a small, unassuming azalea bush. A sacrifice for the cause, I thought grimly. The driver, a man who looked like he wrestled bears for fun, hopped out and looked at my house, then at his clipboard, then back at my house. "You the guy who ordered the big TV?" he yelled. "The digital numerical display board," I yelled back, walking outside. "Whatever, pal," he grunted, lowering the hydraulic lift gate. On it sat a wooden crate the size of a smart car. The installation was a magnificent spectacle of suburban disruption. Gus arrived with his two-man crew, a pair of burly, silent men who communicated only in grunts and head nods. They brought with them a small crane, which they parked on my lawn. The quiet hum of the neighborhood was replaced by the roar of the crane's engine, the whine of industrial-grade drills, and Gus's booming voice shouting instructions. Carol Weatherby was, of course, front and center for the whole ordeal. She stood on her porch across the street, arms tightly crossed, a cordless phone pressed to her ear. She was a statue of pure, unadulterated rage. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Dave. "Dave, she's on the phone. I think with the city. She looks puce. Puce, I tell you." I grinned and gave a cheerful wave in Carol's direction. She did not wave back. The process was mesmerizing. Gus and his team were artisans of oversized installations. They bolted a massive steel frame to the wall above my garage. They ran thick black conduit from the garage up the side of the house with military precision. Neighbors I'd never spoken to were now gathered in small clumps on the sidewalk, pretending to chat while blatantly filming the entire operation on their phones. Another text from Dave. "Dave, Mrs. Henderson from down the street is pretending to prune her roses, but is definitely filming this. She just gave me a thumbs up." "Dave, I think I just heard the phrase flagrant disregard for community covenants being shouted into a phone. She's pacing now." The climax of the installation came when they uncrated the scoreboard itself. It was a beautiful, terrifying slab of black glass and metal. The crane operator, with the delicate touch of a surgeon, lifted the 2-ton screen into the air, swung it over my prize-winning rose bushes, and guided it toward the waiting frame. Gus and his crew, perched on ladders, muscled it into place. There was a series of loud, satisfying clunks as the locking bolts engaged. By dusk, the work was done. The crane was gone, the truck had departed, and Gus's crew was packing up their tools. What remained was the scoreboard. A huge, dark, inert rectangle now dominated the front of my house. It was a monolithic testament to a very bad idea. It looked utterly, profoundly ridiculous. Gus wiped the sweat from his brow and did a final check on the wiring panel he'd installed in the garage. "She's all hooked up," he announced, a proud father looking upon his newborn child. He handed me a small black remote control with a single, large, tempting red button on it. "All you gotta do is press the button. The honors are all yours." I took the remote. It felt heavy with possibility. "Thanks, Gus, for everything. You're a true patriot." "Just call me when you're ready to mount a catapult on your roof," he said with a wink, before climbing into his truck and rumbling away. And then there was silence. The sun had set. The streetlights flickered on. My neighbors had retreated back into their homes, but I could feel their eyes on me from behind their curtains. The scoreboard loomed, dark and silent. The trap was set, the power was connected. But I didn't turn it on. Not yet. I was going to wait. I was going to let them wonder. The anticipation, I decided, was part of the punishment. I waited until 8 p.m. sharp. The night had settled in completely, a thick blanket of suburban tranquility that I was about to rip to shreds. Sarah stood beside me in the driveway, phone held aloft, recording for legal purposes, though I could see the tremor of suppressed laughter in her hand. Dave was watching from his porch, giving me a nervous thumbs up. From across the street, Carol Weatherby's house was dark, save for the telltale silhouette in the front window. She was waiting. They were all waiting. I took a deep, theatrical breath held the small remote control aloft like it was the key to a nuclear missile silo, and pressed the big red button. For a split second, nothing happened, and then the world exploded in light. The scoreboard flickered to life with the force and intensity of a collapsing star. 4-foot-tall, cherry-red digital numbers blazed across the screen, announcing to the world, and possibly to low-orbiting satellites, that this was house number 124. The light was biblical. It washed over the street, erasing shadows, turning night into a weird, artificial day. My perfectly manicured lawn was illuminated like the 50-yard line at the Super Bowl. The houses across the street were bathed in a demonic red glow. It was glorious. It was horrifying. It was everything I had dreamed of and more. As if that wasn't enough, the custom program I had worked on with Gus kicked in. After 10 seconds, the numbers switched from red to a cool electric blue. Then they dissolved and were replaced by the current time and temperature, 8:01 p.m., 68 degrees Fahrenheit. A moment later, that display faded, and a new message scrolled across the screen in vibrant green, "Go Cougars," in honor of our local high school football team. Finally, it cycled back to the main event, 124, this time in a gentle, strobing rainbow pattern. The reaction from across the street was immediate and immensely satisfying. A shriek tore through the night air, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. Carol Weatherby's front door flew open, and she stumbled onto her porch, a hand shielding her eyes from the glare. She was a silhouette of fury, vibrating with indignation. My phone, sitting on the porch rail, began to ring. The caller ID was blocked. I knew who it was. I sauntered over, picked it up, and hit the speakerphone button. "Hello?" a voice screeched, so high-pitched it could etch glass. "Alex here," I said calmly. "What is that? That thing on your house, you maniac?" Carol shrieked. "You have turned this neighborhood into a truck stop. I am calling the police. I am calling the city. I am calling my lawyer. You are in violation of Section 12, Article 5. Whoa, slow down, Carol," I said, putting on my most reasonable tone. "It's just my house number. The bylaws clearly state I need to display it, and I wanted to make sure it was very, very visible. For safety, you know." "It is not standard!" she howled. "Well, that's where you're wrong," I replied, the thrill of the argument coursing through me. "I've done my research. A scoreboard is a very standard way of displaying numbers all across America." "Are you saying you're anti-football, Carol? That sounds very un-American." There was a sputtering noise on the other end, the sound of a brain completely short-circuiting. This is not over. You will be hearing from our lawyers." "Great. I'll tell them to look for the house with the really nice, clear numbers," I said cheerfully. "Can't miss it." I hung up the phone. The silence that followed was broken only by a slow, deliberate clap coming from Dave's porch. Sarah was laughing so hard she had to lean against a pillar for support. I took a bow. Operation Annoy Thy Neighbor was a resounding success. Carol, true to her word, had called the police. About 15 minutes after my triumphant phone call, 2 sets of flashing red and blue lights sliced through the glow of my scoreboard, pulling up to the curb in front of my house. The arrival of law enforcement sent a fresh ripple of excitement through the neighborhood. More curtains were parted. A few brave souls even stepped out onto their porches. 2 officers got out of their cruisers. One was young, with a fresh-out-of-the-academy haircut and an expression of grim seriousness. The other was older, probably a few years from retirement, with a magnificent mustache that rivaled Gus's, and a look on his face that said he had seen every form of human stupidity imaginable, and was profoundly tired of all of them. I'll call them Officer Serious and Officer Tired. I met them at the end of my driveway, adopting my most helpful, law-abiding citizen posture. "Evening, officers," I said. "Something I can help you with?" Officer Tired sighed, a deep, soulful sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 ridiculous domestic disputes. He tilted his head back to look up at the scoreboard, which was currently displaying 124 in a pleasant shade of purple. He stared at it for a long, long time. "Evening, sir," he said, finally bringing his gaze down to meet mine. "We got a call about a. He paused, searching for the right word. "A light." "My house number, officer," I said with a helpful nod. "Just installed it today. I want to make sure first responders and pizza delivery guys can find the place without any trouble. Public safety is my top priority." Officer Sirius stepped forward, flipping open his notepad. "Ma'am," he said, gesturing with his pen toward Carol's house, where she was standing on her porch, arms crossed, watching the scene intently. "Ma'am says it's illegal commercial signage." "Is it?" I asked, feigning surprise. "Does it say for sale? Is it advertising a new low price on soft drinks? No, it's just my address. And sometimes the weather." At that moment, as if on cue, the display cycled to 8:17 p.m., 67 degrees Fahrenheit. "See? That's just a public service. I'm practically a part of the National Weather Service now." Officer Tired was visibly fighting a smile. The corners of his magnificent mustache were twitching. He walked over to have a word with Carol, who immediately launched into a frantic, high-speed monologue, pointing furiously at my house. Officer Sirius, meanwhile, was stuck with me. "So, does it have a dimmer switch?" he asked, clearly unsure of what he was even supposed to be doing. "It does," I said, "and a variety of color palettes. I can even program in holiday-themed animations. I was thinking of a sleigh and reindeer for Christmas, maybe some exploding fireworks for the 4th of July. He just stared at me. After a few minutes, Officer Tired ambled back over, having successfully extricated himself from Carol's torrent of grievances. He motioned for his young partner to put the notepad away. "Look, son," he said to me, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Here's the deal. It's ridiculous. You know it, I know it. And I'm pretty sure the International Space Station knows it." He gestured up at the glowing behemoth on my house. "But as far as I can tell, you haven't broken any city ordinances. It's not a traffic hazard, it's not flashing in a way that would trigger a seizure, and it's on your private property. This is a civil matter, an HOA matter." He leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice even more. "And between you and me," he whispered, a definite twinkle in his eye, "this is the funniest damn thing I've seen all year. My wife is never going to believe this." He straightened up, his professional demeanor returning. "That being said, try to be a good neighbor. Just maybe dim it a bit after 11 p.m., okay? For the folks trying to sleep." "Of course, officer," I said with the utmost sincerity. "Consider it done." They got back in their cruisers and drove away, leaving Carol standing on the curb, her mouth agape, utterly defeated by the combined forces of municipal code and common sense. This was my moment of ultimate triumph. I had not only won the battle, but had the law itself shrug and admit that, while my actions were insane, they weren't illegal. I gave Carol a little two-finger salute and went back inside, feeling about 10 feet tall. The morning after the grand unveiling was different. When I went out to get the paper, the world felt charged with a new energy. People who used to just give a curt nod were now smiling at me, giving me waves. Mrs. Henderson, the one who had been filming the installation, was in her garden and gave me a very enthusiastic thumbs up. The legend of the Scoreboard house had clearly spread overnight. The fallout was swift. By 10 a.m., a car from the local news channel was parked down the street, a reporter trying to get a good shot of the house. I politely declined an interview, preferring to let the Scoreboard speak for itself. By noon, I had received a blustering 5-page cease and desist letter via courier from the HOA's law firm. It was full of phrases like wanton disregard, nuisance doctrine, and irreparable harm to the community's aesthetic character. I had been expecting this. The night before, flush with victory, I had done some research and found a lawyer on an anti-HOA subreddit. His name was Frank, and his website's motto was Fighting Petty Tyrants since 1998. I forwarded him the letter. His response came 10 minutes later. "This is hilarious," Frank's email read. "They have nothing. Their own bylaws are too vague. Let them sue. It'll be a blast. In the meantime, I'll send them a letter back that uses the word frivolous at least 6 times. But the most significant change wasn't legal or journalistic. It was cultural. Something had broken in the neighborhood's collective psyche. My absurd, over-the-top act of defiance had shown everyone that the emperor, or in this case, the HOA president, had no clothes. A quiet rebellion began to ripple through the streets of Maple Creek. It started small. The next day, Dave, my mild-mannered, path-watering neighbor, proudly planted a single, unapproved, gloriously tacky pink flamingo in the middle of his lawn. He'd texted me a picture of it with the caption, "For the cause." The lady down the street, whose wind chimes had been declared a noise pollutant, defiantly hung up a new, even larger set. Their gentle tinkling sounded like the bells of freedom. Someone else put up a small, decorative flag for their favorite football team by their door. Each was a tiny act of defiance, a small crack in the beige facade. I had inadvertently become the leader of the Maple Creek Liberation Front. The HOA, facing a full-scale insurrection and a pending legal bill from their lawyer for a case they couldn't win, was forced to act. They called an emergency community meeting to propose an amendment to the bylaws. The amendment was long and incredibly specific, detailing approved fonts, Times New Roman, Arial, Cambria, sizes between 4 and 8 inches in height, materials, brass, nickel, or bronze, and, most importantly, maximum lumen output for all address identification systems. In doing so, they had to admit the old rule was too vague. It was a tacit admission of defeat. I attended the meeting, sat in the back row, and smiled. I even voted in favor of the new amendment. My work was done. As a gesture of goodwill, and because Officer Tired had been so cool about it, I made a deal. I agreed to abide by the spirit of the new rule. I would use the Scoreboard's dimmer function to bring it down to a reasonable level after 10 p.m. I would limit the "Go Cougars" messages to game nights only. It was a truce. The story ends here, on my front porch, a few weeks later. The sun is setting, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. Sarah is beside me, and Dave has come over with a 6-pack of beer. We're sitting in patio chairs, bathed in the soft, programmable, and now fully compliant glow of my house number. It's currently a pleasant, calming shade of cyan. "You know," Dave says, taking a sip of his beer, "Carol's started a petition to have maximum flamingo height added to the next meeting's agenda." "Let her," I say with a grin. "I'm already looking into military-grade laser-based house numbering systems. I hear you can project them directly onto low-hanging clouds." Sarah groans and playfully swats my arm. Dave just laughs, a real, genuine laugh that I hadn't heard from him before all this started. Across the street, Carol's house is quiet. The curtains are drawn. She lost, and she knows it. My house number, 124, shines steadily in the twilight. It's more than just an address now. It's a landmark, a statement, a beacon of glorious, hard-won, and very well illuminated spite. It's the new standard, my standard,